Well, hello, everybody. It's Friday, and you know what that means. It's time for Lunch and Learn. I miss you all last week. I hope you had a great long weekend for those of you who took advantage of the July 4th weekend. I appreciate you joining us today. I am going solo today because Lynn is on vacation, and so I'm going to be managing the chat. I'm going to be managing the presentation and making sure that we're flowing. So please have a little bit of grace with me. Really, when I do a presentation, I don't like to be on video because I find it distracting and because I have a face for radio. And so I am going to put myself on pause my own personal video so I don't see myself, but just know that I am not a robot. I am here, I am on the other end, and I am going to be with you this next hour and a half. So I think most of you know me. My name is Shireen Carrico. I am the project director of Peer Voice North Carolina, and I am the CEO of Promise Resource Network. And I looked back, and I believe this is our 12th Lunch and Learn. And so I couldn't believe that we have done so many of these already. People are asking me, how long are these going to continue? Are you going to continue to do them weekly? Are you going to go to every other week? Please feel free to drop me a line and let me know your preferences. I think there are a bunch of people that have gotten accustomed to doing this every week and look forward to the time to connect, but also recognize that this is a lot of effort to do this on a weekly basis. I'm happy to do it, but only if there's an interest and there's a need. So drop me a line, let me know your thoughts about the webinars continuing and the frequency of them. So I did want to share with you a little bit about Peer Voice because people keep messaging me and connecting with me and saying, you know, you haven't said much about PVNC. Can you just give us a little bit of an overview? So this is truly a very brief overview. Our Facebook page is on the top right. The Survey Monkey is in the middle, link there for folks that want to get connected with Peer Voice North Carolina. We are also working on a YouTube channel. I actually just set it up before we got on. Because I'm realizing that Facebook doesn't do well with a lot of PowerPoints, PDFs, and links to videos. And so we're hoping the YouTube video channel will make it easier for us to take all the videos we've done, put them in there and make it easier for you. And we're also working on our website. The PVNC has been in operation a little over a year. It is funded federally by the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. We are the 27th state in the country to receive this funding to create a statewide movement that is by people and for people that live with labels of mental health issues, co-occurring substance use issues, and also experiences of homelessness, former incarceration, domestic violence, and other social justice issues. So I just wanted to say that there are a bunch of things that PVNC does and we're involved in. And in some subsequent webinars, I'll give you just sort of an overview of what we've accomplished over the last year and few months. But part of what we are here to do is to influence standards for peer support in North Carolina, the profession, the practice, the training, the policies related to it, the supervision, funding connected to peer support, and to also create funding streams for independent peer-run organizations and consumer-operated agencies to be able to offer alternatives to traditional treatment. So that is part of PVNC's task and the work that we have been asked to do federally in North Carolina. And we are also developing a peer and recovery technical assistance center. COVID kind of sidelined our original plans. And so we came up with the Lunch and Learn idea to make sure that we are trying this out, seeing what the response is, getting a sense of what people really want and need, and to start building up our compendium of online trainings and topics. So you have all been a part of it if you've been a part of these Lunch and Learns and helping us build our own knowledge and experience around what works in North Carolina and what people are looking for. And then the last thing that I will say about PBNC is we are working together to really mobilize people that have been directly impacted. We call experts by experience in a lot of different ways. One is around forensic peer support. We have a coalition called the Peer Justice Initiative that is working to bring a credential for forensic peer support into North Carolina. We had a pilot group that worked on a definition for peer wellness centers, and now there is an RFA that was out from the state. They're going to fund 2 peer wellness centers in North Carolina as a pilot. We have a group called RAFT, Recovery Alternatives to Forced Treatment, and in that group we look at involuntary commitment rates, reasons for involuntary commitment, and help to advocate for alternatives to forced treatment. We have a peer support standards expert commission that is working on developing an oversight body for peer support in the state of North Carolina. And then the last couple I'll just share with you is we're developing a credential for peer support specialists working in integrated settings. And we are creating the CEUs specific to the practice of peer support for both peer support specialists and for supervisors. The supervisory training is going to start in August with a very specific cohort of the integrated care providers, and that's going to be a 7-session web-based series that is very interactive. So that just gives you a little bit of elevated perspective of PBNC and some of the things that we're tasked to do and what we've been working on for the past year. So today, I know you're going to get tired of me saying it. Somebody already said to me, you say this with every single topic. This truly is one of my favorite topics to discuss and to train on. This is usually a day-long training for me, and I've tried to cull it down to about an hour, hour and 15 minutes. We'll see where we land on that. But this is one of my favorites, and part of the reason why is when I started to understand behavior, my behavior, and understand others' behaviors, it really unlocked a door for me. It gave me a key to be able to connect with people that are experiencing really significant emotional distress without defaulting back to this idea of, well, they're just non-compliant, they're just service resistant. It really gave me some tools and some knowledge and some awareness to stop with the lens of clinicalizing and pathologizing people and really dive into what are they experiencing and what is behind the behavior and what exactly is behavior. So that's what we're going to focus on today. Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to talk and contribute to the conversation, and also use the chat. Sharon has been gracious enough to offer to check on the chat with us. So there are a couple of key things that I want to make sure that we are all on the same page with because they're going to set the stage for the rest of the information to come. And that is, starting with the functions of a peer support specialist. There are 3 major functions of peer support specialists. The first one is one that we know very well, and that is actually providing peer support to other people with shared experiences, to family members, families that are involved in systems. So it's using the wisdom of our own experience. And most of the trainings that we do are related to the skills to offer really great peer support in North Carolina. Unfortunately, the other 2 parts of the triangle often gets left behind. The second side is a change agent. So as a peer support specialist, we are also challenging our internal organizational culture, the way we view mental health and people with labels of mental illness and substance use, the way we treat people. We're challenging the relationships, we're challenging the environment, and we are also doing that relative to policy. So macro level system change. We're looking at policies that really do create an inequity, a marginalization, and even oppression of people labeled with mental health and substance use issues. So a key critical role for us as peer supports is to be a change agent, both within our organizations, in our communities, and then larger picture systems. In order to do both of those well, The third part of the triangle means that we are in and out of systems a lot. I don't know about each of you and what roles that you play. I can tell you with me and the organization of PRN and PBNC, we are in and out of a lot of systems, whether it's criminal justice systems, juvenile justice, youth and family, adult mental health, behavioral health, housing and homelessness, domestic violence. The list goes on and on and on. And as a peer support specialist, we need to understand the system, the language, and the culture of the system without becoming an arm of the system. That's why as peer support specialists, we need to sound different, we need to act different, and we need to look different. We are not just an agent of the system, we are actually agents of change. And we need to understand the system in order to shift it and to weave in and out of it, but we cannot become the system. If we become the system and we sound like every other treatment provider, case manager, licensed clinician, whatever it is that a person experiences, if we sound and look and act like everybody else, then they're left without a peer. We have to be very, very intentional about maintaining our peerness, our mutuality, and all of the lunch and learns that we do are connected in one way to that, as well as the other two sides of the triangle. So the things that we're going to be talking about today are really related to all three, and particularly in but not of the system and change agent. And so when we think about labels, particularly diagnostic labels, there are advantages and their disadvantages. And so I want you to take just sort of a minute and come up with maybe 2 or 3 advantages and 2 or 3 disadvantages of receiving a diagnostic label. And you can put them in the chat or you can unmute yourself. And let's see how many we get. What are the advantages of diagnostics and receiving that type of label? And what are the disadvantages of being diagnosed and receiving that type of label?
Well, you know, I'll always jump in. I have a client. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, go for it, Julie.
Okay, I have a client who is diagnosed with a bunch of stuff. Paranoid, schizophrenia, you know, bipolar, etc. And she is awesome and I love her. But in my company, she was given to another peer support, my language is not great. Another peer support was supposed to support her. And this peer support said, I said she had, I found out she had all these diagnoses and I couldn't work with her because I thought that was way above my, grade level or whatever. And I don't know if it had just stopped with that person. Would she have had a peer? Luckily she came to me and I'm down with whatever mental health, mental healthily. So I think that's a disadvantage. That's a disadvantage. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. I mean, these labels that we have, so I'm sitting here as a person with, I lost count. I think I had 7 or 8 mental health diagnoses. And everywhere I go, those labels precede me if I go to any sort of services or treatment, right? And there's a disadvantage to that, which is people can look at those labels and think, ooh, that's too much, that person's too complex, I'm not going to be able to serve that person, or make assumptions about me based on the diagnostic labels that we have. As a matter of fact, we know within treatment systems, there are certain diagnoses that you have that are stigmatized. I know so many people that have said, I will take any diagnosis, just do not diagnose me as borderline personality disorder. It has become so stigmatized within our treatment system that people themselves are saying, don't label me with that. And so I appreciate that, Julie. That is definitely a disadvantage. Tabitha in the chat said, advantage, there are treatment options. You don't have to deal with this alone. So knowing that there are other people. Disadvantage is cookie cutter treatment and stigma, right? So the cookie cutter treatment, and Tabitha, tell me if I'm accurately portraying this, is if you have a particular label That means that there are certain treatments that are connected to that label, and that is the treatment that you get. So if you take borderline personality disorder, since we just talked about it as an example, the assumption is everybody that has that label will benefit from CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, or dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT. And so that creativity of finding out who I am, the engagement in relationships, all of those other things almost can become secondary to finding a treatment model based on your label or your diagnosis. Catherine says advantage, access to services you might not otherwise have if you don't have the right diagnosis. Disadvantage, of course, labeling and stigma. Anna, disadvantage, perpetuating trauma. Sure, if your mental health issues and the stigma is connected, that can be really re-traumatizing for people. There's a feeling of hopelessness and helplessness. The human can be lost, and the person becomes the label, either by ourselves, by professionals, our family members. Labels and diagnoses can put us into a box, but we are much more complex than that. Okay, so if everybody could also mute yourself, if you talk, just remute yourself, please. That would be great. So yeah, let's see how many we got. Qualify for funding. We know that you have to have the right diagnosis in order to qualify for certain types of health insurance like Medicaid, state-funded health insurance, and even private insurance. And that funding also qualifies you for treatment. And several of you had said that that's one of the advantages. Tabitha said, you may not feel like you're alone. I remember when I got my first diagnosis, there was in the beginning sort of a relief or a sigh of, okay, this is not in my head. There are other people, there's a name to what I'm experiencing. And I felt in the beginning like I can connect with other people and I didn't feel as isolated. It can give direction for treatment options, right? So one of the benefits of data and best practices is that we know certain things, core ingredients that are effective versus ineffective, and it can give us some direction for what treatment options can look like, and it can give an understanding of symptoms for the person, and can give an understanding of symptoms for other people. There are disadvantages. We talked a lot about the stigma and stereotypes. Many people put that in there. The second one is preconceived notions. If you have never experienced voice hearing, there are a lot of preconceived notions about voice hearing and people that hear voices. And along with that label can come misconceived notions about what that means and what that does not mean. There can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So in the beginning, when I was first diagnosed, I was relieved. I felt like I wasn't alone. For me, it also became a reason for me to give up, a reason to explain why I was behaving the way that I was, a reason to say, well, I'm broken, I'm sick, I might as well not try. And it became a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I know many people that have experienced that as well with many other labels, including the label of felon, the label of the homeless. Well, that all I am is a felon, so I might as well act like a felon, or I can't be more than what that label is. There can easily be a one-size-fits-all which is what Tabitha said. Everybody that has this label goes into this box and goes into that program. We know it's much more complex than that, as Anna said. You're often treated as a client, not a person. So you can no longer have a bad day. If you have a bad day, you don't want to get out of bed, truly what happens oftentimes is you get the question, did you take your meds? Have you gone to treatment? Are you feeling depressed? Are you feeling suicidal? All of your behavior becomes explained only through the lens of your diagnosis or your labels. And that minimizes the breadth of our human experience and the ability for us to have both good days and bad days. So there are pros and there are cons. So I have two questions for you, and I just want you to think through this, and again, answer in the chat or unmute yourself. What labels were you given in treatment? And let's go beyond diagnostic labels. But what labels were you given when you were in treatment? And how did that impact you? Another way of looking at it, if you don't have lived experience, is what labels do we hear flying around in treatment programs and systems all the time to refer to a person, to refer to their behavior? What are some of those labels, and how might those labels impact you or impact the person who is the recipient of the labels?
Shireen, I know that mine was non-compliance. I just, wouldn't do the right thing for what I was supposed to be there for, I guess.
So you were labeled with non-compliance, and how did that affect you, your sense of self, your worldview, Sharon?
Well, to be honest, it gave me an excuse to be non-compliant.
A little bit more?
You may want to get another example.
No, I love that example, please.
I went in angry, and they didn't address the anger. So I was non-compliant. I didn't buy into anything at the beginning because I was so angry, and nobody tapped into that.
So the root of what they saw your behavior as unwillingness, rebelliousness, what they labeled as non-compliant, for you the root was anger.
Mm-hmm.
What were you angry at? What were you angry about?
Everything that had ever been done to me and everything I'd ever done to someone.
Okay. How did that non-compliant affect your identity, your sense of self?
I think it made me feel really small and just hopeless.
Yeah. Yeah, Anna put that in there as well. She said she's been labeled with everything from bipolar to convict to inmate to criminal to hopeless, crazy, bad mother, morally deficient, and of course, non-compliant in every system. And that keyword of hopelessness, those messages can seep into our spirit, our bones, seep under our skin, and we take that in. When you compound that by years, I have been system involved for 33 years. When you compound all of those labels and all of those messages of being sick and being broken and being unruly and being resistant and being non-compliant, it has such a significant impact on our sense of self and our belief in our ability to overcome whatever those issues are, right? Tabitha says manipulative. Oh, we hear that one a lot. Antisocial. I'll add criminogenic, Tabitha. I hear that all the time within the justice system. This person has criminogenic thinking. They have criminogenic behavior. Toya says non-compliant. Abby, treatment resistant, kind of like treatment resistant depression, made me feel like I was doing something wrong and trying not to get better. So feeling blamed yourself for people are trying to help me, it's not working, so something must be wrong with me, right? Because not only is it not working, but now I'm being told I have something that is treatment resistant. So it's not going to work, ever. You talk about hopelessness. Like I'm a bad person, Julie said. So yeah, keep them coming. And then Sharon said, of course, we believe the experts. For those of us who lived during times where we were taught to believe that people with degrees and badges and titles were the experts and best for us, it's easy to just go ahead and believe what people are saying about you and not helping them to dig deeper or understanding your sense of self. And of course, all of that can easily lead to this identity of mental patient, of convict, felon, all of those labels that we have been told. And so the second foundation I want to say as we get into this is language is incredibly powerful. And I want us to be, as peer support specialists and allies, to be very intentional about the language that we use to describe ourselves, the language we use to characterize other people, and to avoid all of those labels. If we were in class together, we would be filling a couple of big white sheets, paper sheets that go on the walls of the labels that we hear in treatment settings. Everything from service resistant and manipulative to non-compliant to lazy, name it. These labels are used routinely in the name of treatment. Toya said she manipulated her way out because they didn't know what to do with her. I did the same exact thing, Toya. You didn't eat for almost 3 days and didn't come out of your room. And Julie said, learn helplessness. That's exactly the result of all of these things. You learn how to either get along in the system, to get over the system, to get what you need, or become a part of the system and become chronically ill. And these types of words and these labels have that effect on people. This is one of our memes. It's one of my favorite quotes. To call someone lazy, attention-seeking, or non-compliant is to admit that you don't understand them. Labels, to me, are a lazy way of providing services, because what we can do when we use a label is we can excuse our inability to see people, to understand them, to establish a relationship, and to actually have to be really creative in how we engage and how we support people. It's much easier to call somebody service resistant or manipulative and say, you know what, I'm not going to bother with that person. They're just manipulative. They're just service resistant. I'm just going to use planned ignoring. Whatever the case may be, it's easier to label people than it is to do the hard work of understanding and seeing them and earning trust and earning respect, understanding where Sharon's anger was coming from, and to help her heal the roots of where that anger stemmed from. That's a lot of work. I will tell you, that is our work. That is our job, not only as peer support specialists, but as also other recovery professionals in this field. The result of this, as you all started to touch on, is this patient identity. I was Shireen. I was a really good patient, believe it or not. I was very compliant for about 9 or 10 years. People that know me now don't believe that that was the case, but that was the case. I was a good patient. I believed in my millions of diagnoses. I believed that I would never be able to go to college. I would be in and out of hospitals. I believed that I was broke. I always believed that I was sick and that I was never going to get better. Until one day after a suicide attempt, long story, I won't share it with you, but after a suicide attempt, I had this moment of clarity. I was about 19 years old at the time, had been in the systems for about 7 years at that point, and said, I have to learn how to control this. I have to understand what's happening in my mind and what's happening in my body, or I might as well just die, because I can't continue to do what I've been doing. I can't continue to live this life. So for me, the more treatment involved I got, and the more labels I received, and the more messages that I was sick, the sicker I became. And it wasn't until I rebelled against it that I had to do the heavy work of figuring out who I was beyond all of those labels. And I had to unpack a lot of things. I had to do a lot of hard work and self-reflection, but that was the beginning of my real freedom in recovery after a suicide attempt. So this is I'm not going to read all of this, but you all get the point of You and Me, which is Deb Cecila, which is a person with lived experience. It talks about the difference in how we use terms for somebody that is providing services versus somebody that's receiving services. After you've been labeled, if you're overly excited, you're happy. But if I'm overly excited, I'm manic. If you're crying and sleeping all day, you're sad and need time out. If I'm crying and sleeping all day, I'm depressed and need to get up. If you imagine the phone ringing, you're stressed out. If I imagine the phone ringing, I'm psychotic. If you're afraid to leave the house at night, you're cautious. If I'm afraid, I'm paranoid. If you speak your minds and express your opinion, you're assertive. If I speak my mind and express my opinion, I'm aggressive. If you get angry, you're considered upset. If I get angry, I'm considered dangerous. If you overreact to something, you're sensitive. If I do it, I'm out of control. So we get the point, right? That's what happens when we are given diagnostic labels. All of a sudden, everything about us is dwindled down to nothing more than our symptoms, our diagnoses, our side effects, our medications, and our treatments. That's what leads to that patient identity that we talked about. And so what I want to do today, and this is another sort of ground framework, is to really look at the idea of reframing, or taking in information and shifting our perspective about something that is actually helpful and something that is actually hopeful and useful. And so while I started rebelling against treatment, I was referred to as non-compliant. But to me, it saved my life. If I had kept being compliant with what they were asking me to do, like I was for the first many, many years, I would have ended up successfully taking my life. I promise you that. And it wasn't because people were intentionally trying to be hurtful or harmful. They were trying to help, but they were trying to help from a list or a toolbox that they were taught that was incompatible with what I needed and who I was. As a matter of fact, while I was receiving all of these diagnoses as a kid, not one adult in my life looked at my behavior and recognized it as a sign of sexual abuse. I had been experiencing sexual abuse the entire time I was in treatment as a child, and no adult or treatment provider saw it as a cry for help or saw my behavior as a symptom of abuse and neglect. Instead, I kept getting clinical diagnoses. That is how serious this issue can become for people. Here's another one of our memes, of course, that I love. When we say people are service resistant, what we actually are saying is that our services are people resistant. So think about that for a moment. When providers talk to me about non-compliance and service resistance, I want to know what it is about their agency where people are not engaging. Maybe it's not that people are service resistant, maybe it's that your agency is people resistant. And if you have a people resistant agency, you're not going to be successful because people are not going to show up to services that they don't find helpful. If you hear I'm snoring in the background, it's my dog, I apologize. So here's another foundational element, and I've showed this once before in one of our webinars. On the top left hand, if we want to address mental health, and the shovel is the intersectionality of social justice, we have to dig deeper, which means that we have to dig beyond medical models, we have to dig beyond pathologizing people, easy for me to say. We have to dig deeper than diagnostic criteria, and we have to dig deeper than pharma. Our entire behavioral health system can be summed up in those first top three layers. When the truth of the matter is that for many of us that come into mental health and substance use, we come into it very honestly because of poverty and neglect and sexism and homophobia and injustice and mass incarceration and lack of housing, exclusion. There are a lot of reasons that what we show up as that's labeled as mental health or substance use issues, there are a lot of things underneath those labels that if we don't dig deeper, we're going to continue to just diagnose, criticize, and accuse people, label them, and disregard our role in understanding them. Peer support specialists live at the bottom of this graph. We don't live at the top. As a matter of fact, I don't even want our peer support specialists at PRN to be trained in diagnostics or anything clinical. Because once we are trained with that language and that lens, it is easy to see everything through that. As a peer support specialist, we focus on the bottom stuff. That doesn't mean that symptoms can't be real and that they're not real things that are connected to diagnostic labels. And we want to support people through those things. But it means that the person there's so much more to that diagnosis and what we're seeing in their behavior that if we don't understand it better and support them to understand themselves, we continue to perpetuate that cycle of illness, of mental patient, and of addict. So let's talk about behavior. What makes us tick? And when we talk about behavior, I want to say this. We're talking about all of us. We are not talking about people that have been labeled with mental health issues or labeled with substance use issues. We're not talking about people exclusively that have been incarcerated, have experienced homelessness. We are talking about humans. What is behavior? And in particular, I want to introduce some of you, this might be a new term, to the idea of functional behavior. So I'm going to start with a question. Well, actually, I'm going to start with what is behavior? So if you had to characterize what behavior is, what are one or two words, maybe a partial sentence, that you would use to define behavior? What is it?
Mine is a reaction to a trigger.
Okay, so Sharon, behavior to you is a reaction to something. Okay? Tabitha says it's our actions. David, are you unmuted? Did you want to say something?
Yes, I would like to say it's the way you act.
The way you act, right? It's something we can see. It's something observable. It's visible. Cedric, did you have your hand up? Did you want to unmute yourself or did you want to chat?
Yes, I was going to say that behavior is a way, it's a form of expression. Sometimes when we struggle with the way we're trying to get something out, and sometimes we can express it through behavior.
Okay, so it's expression. Fred agrees, it's expression. Okay, now we're starting to dig a little bit deeper, right, into the causes of behavior. So here's our definition. This is a Merriam-Webster definition. It's how we conduct ourselves. It's something that you do in response to something else, which is what Sharon said, the response of an individual, a group, or species to the environment. It's the way in which someone behaves, no duh, and it's the way in which something functions or operates. So typically, behavior is absolutely observable. There are two primary functions. So we're introducing you to the concept of functional behavior. There are two primary functions that behavior serves. What are they? And some of you have already mentioned some. What are the two primary functions of behavior? What function does behavior serve for us? Anna, you got one of them, communication. Behavior is always communication. If it's observable, the person is communicating something. Here's where that goes awry. Oftentimes, we misinterpret what the behavior means. And you can misinterpret for a lot of different reasons. You can misinterpret because of your own history and your own experience. You can misinterpret behavior through the lens of something clinical and miss what's really happening, like was in the case for me. You can misinterpret because you're not looking at the entire picture. Your perspective has become narrow. But behavior is always communication. What we want to do as peer support specialists and allies is to become better at interpreting and understanding what the person is communicating through their behavior, including ourselves. So that is one primary function of behavior. What is the second function? Second primary function of behavior. Fred and Cedric started to hit on it. You're talking about expressing. What are you expressing through your behavior?
I would like to say feelings.
Yeah, you're expressing a lot of things. You're expressing how you're feeling. You're expressing what you want, right? Sharon said she was expressing anger. It looked like non-compliance through her behavior, but the root of it was anger. And the reason why I asked her, what were you angry at? because the answer to that question is going to help me to better understand what her experience is. Anger at somebody else is very different than anger at yourself. And depending on the circumstance, anger is not all equal. If I don't understand that and I don't support Sharon to unpack that a little bit, she can go through the world with this angry mug and rebelling against everybody and everything, and she will always be called non-compliant until she is healing from all of those and those things that had injured her and shaped her to experience that anger, right? So communication is always number one for behavior. Here's the second one. If I had to categorize it, I would say communication is always a way to get a need met. And I welcome you after this to really think about your own behavior and think about other people and see what category of getting your needs met fits with your behavior. So let me give you a couple of examples. Fred, did you take yourself off mute because you wanted to say something?
I was just going to say what you said, that you're expressing that a need is not being met.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we don't acknowledge that that's what it is, that someone's need is not being met. So therefore they're letting you know it's not met.
Beautiful. And so give me some examples. If you can, I know that you're in a noisy background, Fred. What are some examples of unmet needs that we as people communicate through our behavior? What are those needs?
I mean, I'll just start with a baby crying, just let you know they're hungry. But you know, as you grow, there are all kinds of needs. If you have a mental health challenge, and say for instance, you need for someone to respond to you a certain kind of way. Say for instance, if someone approaches you and get very close to you, and that is a trigger for you or an issue for you, then you know your behavior might express to them that, hey, you're kind of getting in my space. I need for you to, you know, to move back. So I mean, I'm just saying, when you're talking about mental health or just being a human being, it can be a lot of different needs that you are expressing that are not being met.
Yeah, and so I'm going to give you a couple of categories. Julie said that the need for respect. Anna said the need to be heard and be seen. If we were to break all these down, there's a bunch of categories that start emerging. Number one is the need for connection. That is the need to be seen, the need to be heard, the need to connect with another person. Not based on your label, not based on your symptoms, not based on the fact that they are a staff and you are a client, but a real connection with another human being is a basic need that we have. If we have learned throughout our lives that the only way that we can be heard is by doing something to get that level of reinforcement or that level of attention, we have equated in our bodies, in our nervous system, and in our neurological system, the connection between that behavior and getting the connection that we are desiring from somebody, even if it's a negative type of attention or connection, right? Love and belonging is the second basic need. We see this a lot in gang activity. So while somebody is labeled criminogenic, when I look at people that are connected to gangs, I actually look at it from a sense of love and belonging and connection. There is a reason why they are connected to something like that. And when we bring it back, we stop the labels and stop looking at the behavior. What is gang affiliation about? It's about having a family. It's about having a culture, having norms, having people that have you. It's about some of these other things. You were talking about, in terms of mental health, I will tell you that avoidance in general, with or without a mental health label, avoidance is protection, right? So if you come up to me and I cringe or I walk away or I avoid an uncomfortable situation, that is self-preservation, and that is an unmet need. That is my way of getting my safety need met. The biggest one that I see in services is control and power. I need to be heard. And if you're going to continue to have power over me, when I've had people have power over me my entire life, and you're not going to hear me, I'm going to yell louder. I'm going to get in your face. I'm going to start throwing shit. I'm going to set this place on fire. Whatever it is, the need to be heard is significant, as well as the need for personal power and personal control in all of our lives. And then the unmet basic needs. You were talking, Fred, about the baby. The baby is crying. Why is the baby crying? Is it hungry, which is a basic need? Is it looking for connection? Is it looking for affection and love? What is the baby needing? So when we start looking at behavior, I want to start thinking about it in terms of the function of the behavior, not the behavior itself. If somebody is avoiding you, they're not opening the door, they refuse to meet with you. If somebody is labeled non-compliant, they're not working on their goals, they're not working their plan. If somebody is not following the rules of a program, they're yelling, they're screaming, whatever the quote unquote behavior is, I want us to start thinking about this from the perspective of what are they communicating and what need are they getting met through their behavior. Anna said, powerlessness, a child will burn its village down to feel its warmth. Absolutely. And then Toya said, compassion, when no compassion is shown, you will find a way to be seen, to be visible to other people, right? So keeping those in mind, what I want to do is start looking at behavior through the correct lens for peer support specialists. We are not going to look at it through the what's wrong with you lens. The what's wrong with you lens is, well, the person is schizophrenic, the person is psychotic, the person is criminogenic, the person is unruly, the person is lazy, the person is manipulative, the person is bipolar, the person is manic. That is looking at it through a clinical behavior label lens. What I want us to do is look at this through the lens of what happened to you. What are you experiencing and what have you experienced that you are communicating with your behavior? What need are you trying to get met through your behavior? In other words, understanding trauma and the trauma response. We know the majority of people that come into public behavioral health systems, around 98%, have experienced not only trauma, but complex trauma. And just as we are wired as human beings to survive, we have these responses in our neurological systems that are wired in. One is the danger response. The danger response is, if I have experienced danger, hurt, and harms in my past, like I have with sexual abuse, I may now, my body as a system might be scanning the world for danger and be seeing dangerous people in dangerous situations in areas where there is no real threat. But because my nervous system was activated, because I was harmed, my worldview and my body has become rewired to be very sensitive to anything that feels dangerous or unsafe.
Shireen, Julie wants to know more about complex trauma.
So complex trauma, so when we think about trauma, there are 3 E's. There's the effect, there is the event, the effect, and I forget what the 3rd E is, the experience of it. The event, the effect, and the experience of it. Complex trauma means that there wasn't an event. It means that the person has experienced and sustained trauma in multiple areas of their lives over extended periods of time. So it's somebody that has experienced a lot of different types of trauma over a long period of time, or one type of trauma over a long period of time. It's called complex trauma. Great question. Yeah, and I see that Fred said safety is a need to be met, but sometimes people only respond to physical safety and ignore emotional safety and mental safety. Absolutely. And part of what we want to do, as I said, with this response, the danger response, is when I feel unsafe emotionally, you will see it in my behavior. And the answer is to not try to change my behavior. It's try to help me to feel emotionally safe. Right? It goes back to Sharon's anger. The issue wasn't her non-compliance. The issue was her anger. And unless we start seeing her and helping her understand her own anger, all we are going to be doing is creating behavior modification and kicking her out of programs for noncompliance. The whole reason why she was in the program was because she's effing noncompliant. We're kicking her out for the same exact reason why she's there. It makes no sense, right? So yeah, it can lead to mistrust of everything and everyone in the world, and avoidance can be used as a strategy but seen as non-compliant. So we're going to get into that in a minute. So the danger response, everything is seen as danger, and that leads us to the fight, flight, or freeze response. You probably know for yourself if you have a tendency when you feel unsafe, when you feel powerless, when you feel unseen, when you feel like you're in danger, if your tendency is to go more towards fight, clearly we know yours, Sharon. Flight, I'm out of here, which is the avoidance response, or freeze, I get stuck. When I was experiencing the abuse, and it took me many years to be able to talk about this, when I was experiencing abuse as a child, I froze. I froze. And for many years, I felt responsible for, quote unquote, allowing the abuse to continue because I didn't fight back. I didn't say no. I didn't flee. It was a family member that lived in my home. I froze. I don't freeze anymore, but I've had to learn to adapt my approaches to make sure that I can, in fact, keep myself safe, but not react in ways where there is no real threat to my safety because my nervous system is activated. So I've had to learn how to, what we would call clinically, regulate it, if you will. So our response is heightened with trauma. The more trauma we have experienced in whatever ways we experience it, so that doesn't mean the number of times, the amount of trauma, the number of years, or the type. It's all based on our experience of it. But our response, our danger response, is heightened with our trauma reactions, right? So here are some common misinterpretations. I call it self-preservation, fight, flight, and freeze. All of those behaviors, those needs about connection, the need for avoidance, fight, flight, or freeze is self-preservation. Fight is others are trying to control me. That is the danger. And if others are going to try to control me, my behavior may look like I will do whatever it takes to gain control because I will not be a victim ever again. And that can look like aggression. It can look like threats. It could look like yelling, and it could look like refusing. And here's the problem. From a label perspective, these are folks that are labeled with noncompliance, combative, oppositional defiant disorder as children, service resistant. Those labels tell me absolutely nothing about what that person has experienced and tells me everything about my perception of their behavior, right? In reality, I'm being aggressive and I'm refusing because I have an unmet need for power and control, which all of us have. The second one is flight. My feelings are too overwhelming and I need to get the hell out. I'm not staying here stuck in this situation to be hurt, right? This looks like giving up, hopelessness. It looks like people not showing up for appointments. When you open the door, they don't open the door when you go to their home. They don't show up to the day program. Those may be examples of flight. What the behavior looks like is often labeled as service resistant, right? So this is somebody that's just going with the flow, being really passive or just completely avoiding. And oftentimes these are the people that have been labeled as passive, that can't be helped. These are the folks that are deemed to be gaming the system from a label perspective, or even called a frequent flyer. I don't know if there's a label that is more offensive than that. And then the third one is the freeze. The danger that I can experience with freeze is I can't escape, but can I get invisible? That was me. And these are folks that may, through their behavior, become really silent, really non-communicative, kind of keep to themselves, isolate, or also just leaving services, not engaging. And these are the folks that oftentimes are mislabeled as chronic, lazy, unmotivated, and non-compliant. Does this make sense? We're still building the cake. I hope this is making sense to people. It's 1 o'clock, so we have a half an hour.
Shireen, it's making sense because a lot of times I hear that they know how to use the system as if there's something that great in the system that you would want to continue to use it. You know,
Right.
Yeah.
Right, Fred. It makes me laugh. Yeah, please continue to give me the handout of disability so I can live 200% below the poverty level. I mean, that's not how those of us who have been system involved, I get there are some people that may think that way, but that is also an unmet need. That is also stems back to people's own stuff. We could go back and look at what the functional behavior is of somebody who quote unquote uses a system. I call it survival. But yeah, most people are not saying, well, I'm just trying to use the system to be able to get to get these food stamps. You're not getting rich off of food stamps. Like, you're just getting by, right? And so we have to understand it. System dependency, though, is very, very real. And if we understand where that comes from, instead of labeling it, we have to be able to support people to have a greater sense of self and confidence that they can move beyond that. We also have to understand that we have taught that. When I was 13 and told I would never be able to go to college, by the time I turned 15 or 16, I was also told that I need to get on disability benefits. Think about that message. You will never be able to go to college, Shireen. You need to get on disability benefits. What is the message that they are giving to me? You are a client. You need to have a safety net financially because you will never be able to support yourself. After somebody has heard that for 4 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, do you think we start to believe it? Of course. And then do we start living as if we can't move beyond systems? Yes. That is that learned helplessness that Julie had put in the chat.
I was just going to say also, if there are no other options, then you're going to do whatever it takes to survive. If you are not completing your education, which is sometimes what someone with a mental health challenge might experience because they're thrown out of school every 5 minutes and they do not complete their education, then that really does limit, you know, where they're going from, you know, being a young person. So if you don't have options, then you're going to take advantage of whatever's available in order that you might be able to survive.
That's exactly right. It's called survival, baby. And here's my question, Fred. As a peer support specialist, what is our role in that?
Options.
That dynamic.
Resources.
Yeah, supporting people to find resources, helping people to dream again. I'll tell you, I hate the term person-centered planning, and the reason why is because it's become so co-opted to mean that I think about you while I'm planning your future. We don't need somebody else to plan our future. We need to dream again. At the age when you're 15, 16, when you're in your 20s and you find yourself in a psychiatric hospital, when you're a kid and you're in treatment programs, dreams and hopes in the future gets replaced with schizophrenia and clozapine and psychotropic medications and level systems. We stop dreaming at the age where we were clinicalized or systematized, and that shapes that sense of self. So by the time you as a peer support specialist meets me, Shireen, at 45 years old, I've had 25 years of hopelessness, 25 years of believing that I'm sick, 25 years of not dreaming or believing that I can have a future. As a peer support specialist, we are hope igniters. We support people to dream again. I would rather be called dream-centered planning, because if we don't do anything else as peer support specialists, we inspire hope for you to imagine a life that is not surrounded by cops and treatments and services and medications and people that are paid to be there and government subsidies. That is the ultimate in powerlessness. and the reinforcement of the illness identity that many of us have been taught for years and years and years. So here's another one of our memes. When we share about our self-injury, our substance use, or our eating disorders, we're not simply telling you what's wrong, we're telling you how we've been surviving. Think about that for a moment. Well, we are labeling people as chronic, as self-injurers, as drama kings and queens, as frequent flyers, as an addict, as anorexic. What we are not recognizing is those behaviors are the reason why they're alive today. My suicidal ideation is what has kept me alive for years. And it's hard sometimes for clinicians in particular to hear that and to understand it. But suicide for me, and oftentimes for many people that have experienced suicide attempts and suicide thoughts, our bodies become rewired, particularly our brains, to go to that place when we are feeling boxed in or unsafe or not well, to go automatically to suicide as a thought. My body still goes to suicide as a thought. I just came through a difficult time period myself, and I think about suicide. And I found myself doing some planning recently about it. Here's the difference, though, between today and the time I was 19 with my last actual suicide attempt. Today, I understand it. I understand why my brain goes to it. I understand what it feels like. I understand what it looks like. And I understand how it has served me to help me stay alive. I have embraced it. I have not looked at it as a behavior that needs to stop or to change. I have understood it as the way that I have learned how to survive some really untenable trauma in my life. It's the same thing with substance use. It's the same thing with self-injury, with an eating disorder. Yes, they are diagnostic criteria and diagnostic labels, but if you dig deeper, the behavior speaks volumes about how the person has survived in their life, right? And that's what we want to start doing, is digging underneath and focusing on the underneath. This is also where to Julie, you were talking about the 3 Ps last week. This is also where the 3 Ps come in: predict, prevent, plan, of wellness planning. If I understand the things that activate me, if I know what it feels like inside my body, if I know what it looks like to other people, and other people know the signs in me, and we have a really good prevention plan, so when I'm activated, it doesn't turn into a crisis. And we have a really good plan so that if it turns into a crisis, it doesn't turn into an emergency. That's where those 3 P planning that we did 2 weeks ago comes in and is connected to behavior. Martha Duncan, she said, that is a very powerful statement. Thanks for putting words to my experience. This helps me understanding why I'm able to connect and support others. You are so welcome, Martha. We need to start having these conversations. One of the most frustrating things to me is when I see all these little snapshot memes about suicide. Ask for help, you are loved, you're not alone, call this number. It is not that simple. And many of you on the call today know exactly what I'm talking about. If it were that simple, our suicide rates and attempts would not be increasing. It's not about the behavior. It's about all of the things that have experienced in my life that make me want to end it. And if I don't heal those things, the behavior is not going to change. It doesn't matter how many knives you get rid of from my place, how many Sharpies you prevent me from having, how many signed contracts, safety contracts you have me sign. It has nothing to do with the behavior. It has everything to do with how the behavior is manifesting because of what happened underlying. Okay, so what does trauma look like? Well, from a behavioral perspective, it looks like us. Those of us who've been labeled with mental health and substance use issues. It looks like defiance and theft. It looks like violence and psychosis. It looks like eating disorders and self-harm and suicide attempts. It looks like aggression. It looks like hypervigilance and panic attacks and nightmares. It looks like avoidance. This is what trauma looks like. What I say about behavior and these labels is behavior is the outdation of internal distress. The behavior is the symptom, but the behavior is not the problem. The problem is the anger and the things that led to the anger. The problem, anger is not even the problem, right? Anger is what you are feeling as a result of what has happened to cause you to feel angry. If we don't get to the root of the anger, are we going to really help you, support you? So how do we reframe this? So let me just check on my time. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about this topic. It's 1:09, so we're doing okay on time. I want you to think about this from the perspective now. So we've been talking a lot about ourselves and weaving in people that we support. Now I want you to think about this from the perspective of people that we support. And you know, we usually do this as a very couple hours activity of really digging into behavior and what the function is, and then how do we support people to get their need met as peer support specialists, right? Based on the function of their behavior, not based on the behavior itself. So this is a good activity for you to do on your own. Think about some of the most, what quote unquote could be outrageous behaviors or things that in your agency cause somebody to be discharged punitively for non-compliance or labeled as chronic or lazy or whatever those labels are. What is the behavior that the person is expressing that is getting them labeled in that way? And I've just done a few examples, right? So stop taking medications, won't open the door, or work with somebody, a peer support specialist, refusing to go to therapy, overtaking medications, not taking medications, suicide attempts, threatening behavior, refusing to follow the rules of the program, lying. You can add 10 pages of behaviors because we are very trained in recognizing somebody else's behavior. If we were in a training, what I would want you to do is pick one of these behaviors and identify 3 functions of that behavior that have nothing to do with a diagnostic label, nothing to do with clinical. So you can't say suicide attempt, 3 functions is the person is depressed. Right? If we think about suicide attempt, what is that really communicating? What is the unmet need and what is the person communicating? Same thing with threatening behavior. What are 3 reasons a person would threaten or not follow the rules that have nothing to do with a clinical diagnosis or a label? When we start to look at the function, what is going to emerge is that list of unmet needs. Connection, safety, love, belonging, attention, power, voice, choice, basic needs. Those are frequently the function of the behavior. So as a peer support specialist, if the function of overtaking meds is avoidance, my life is too painful and I just want to numb out, what we're going to be doing to support people is based on the function. How do we help you develop a life that you want to live with, that you want to show up for, so that you don't need to numb out? How can we support you to maybe numb out, but not to the extent where it's dangerous? What are other ways for you to survive difficult emotional feelings? How do we help you learn how to work through difficult emotional feelings? This is where the real healing comes in. And so when we talk about the 3rd column, the strategies for peer support specialists, you can come up with a million creative strategies with somebody to support them to get their needs met in a different way without labeling and disregarding the behavior. So let me pause there and ask you, if you would in the chat or by unmuting yourself, does this make sense to you?
Yes, it makes a lot of sense.
Okay, thank you. And I'm seeing a lot of it make sense. When I tell you that learning this and practicing it changed my entire relationship with other people, changed my relationship with myself, has allowed me to connect and see people that are experiencing really significant distress without dismissing it, disregarding it, trying to change them, trying to box them in, trying to shape or minimize their behavior, or diagnosing them. This was one of the biggest keys to me, to be able to see somebody's pain, try to understand it, and help them heal instead of trying to manage or monitor their behavior. So this is an activity I want to challenge you to do on your own. What are some of the behaviors that you have demonstrated or somebody else you've seen in the work? Think about somebody you're working with right now. Identify what the potential functions of that behavior might be, and then identify, so how can I support that person to get their need met differently? Here is the ideal situation. You're doing this together. Because if I don't understand my anger, if I don't understand my suicide attempts, if I don't understand why I'm walking around threatening people and destroying shit, if I don't understand why I'm avoiding services or I don't want to work in services, if I don't understand it for myself, I am going to continue to operate that way in the world, because that is how I have learned to adapt and to survive. So when we're helping people understand the function, we're helping them to explore. That's that self-work. So why do you do that? What is that about? Where did that come from? When do you remember kind of doing that for the first time? What does that mean to you? We have to be careful with this, that we're not doing this in an accusatory way. We're not doing this in a judgmental way. We're not doing this in a negative sort of way, or a sarcastic sort of way. We are doing this through authentically trying to understand what the person is experiencing. Let me give you a classic example of this. I worked with a young woman who was in treatment programs for 12 years. I met her at the age of 19. By the time I had met her, she had been institutionalized since she was young. She was being aged out of the system and coming into the community for the first time. She came to me first time I met her, and she said she wouldn't talk. Her head was down the entire time. I know that look. I know that feeling. I know what it's like to be institutionalized or to feel institutionalized. And so all of a sudden in the conversation, she said to me, I have really scary thoughts. I have a couple of ways I can respond. I can ignore it and say she's seeking attention. I can ask her all about them and potentially activate, because she didn't know me like that and I didn't know her like that, or I could potentially align. And so what I chose to do was say, really, I have scary thoughts too. And she said, no, I mean, like, I have really scary thoughts. And if I told you what they were, you would have me institutionalized right now. And I said, you know, you don't have to share with me what your thoughts are, but I get that. Would you mind if I shared with you some of mine? By this time, she's looking up and she's looking at me like, who the hell are you? And I said, for real, would you mind hearing some of my thoughts? But you don't have to share yours. And I started sharing with her some of the things that I've experienced over the years. She sat back in her chair. She looked at me. She said, you're really crazy. At that point, I laughed and I said, that's what I've been trying to tell you. That one conversation changed the dynamic of the relationship between she and I, and how we were able to build trust so that she can start explaining what she's experiencing inside her mind and inside her body. And I could support her in ways that felt helpful to her. It was because I helped her to understand the function of her own behavior, rather than just saying, yeah, that's really weird and that's scary, labeling it and then disregarding it. But that was yesterday and today is today and now is the future. No, 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 no. We have to unpack that stuff. We have to understand it. We have to look at it. We have to heal from it if we're going to move forward. And that's all I did, was support her to heal from it. So how do we do this? Number one, we ask questions. We don't assume, and ask with curiosity and without judgment. We understand the person's experience, and this is where asking questions. We don't defer to the diagnosis. I could have looked at her diagnosis, which was paranoid schizophrenia. She had actually 8 diagnoses. One was paranoid schizophrenia. I could have looked at that diagnosis and said, oh, that's why she's saying that. Nope, I'm not interested in what your label is. I want to know what you are experiencing, what it feels like to be you, what the thoughts are like, and whether those thoughts have helped you to survive or whether they're hindering you from moving forward. That is the real work. By the time we were said and done over many years, she came to the conclusion that she doesn't have what's called schizophrenia, that she is just very, very sensitive to other people and very empathic. I can live with that because that is what helped her to move beyond those labels and get a home and get a car and get a life and not live in institutions. She was not hospitalized one time from that point forward. And it wasn't because it was magic. It wasn't because I'm anybody special. She did the heavy lifting. It was because we started to understand these things together and not be afraid of them and not label them. It means that we have to troubleshoot. She and I spent many, many years trying different things and seeing if it would work. And nope, that didn't work. Okay, let's figure out what else can we do. And eventually she found things that worked for her, and those things changed over time. She added new tools. She removed other tools. We developed a wellness toolkit. We developed a 3P plan that I told you about 2 weeks ago. She called it Bob. I don't care what you call it. Call it Earl. Call it M&F'er. I don't care what you call it. Just make sure that it is something that works for you. And watch your mouth. As a peer support specialist and an ally, we do not use words that hurt people. We do not label them. We do not criticize them. We do not accuse them. And we don't disregard them based on their diagnosis. We reframe our worldview, and in doing so, we support people to reframe their own experiences. I am no longer afraid of suicide. I was petrified of suicide at one point, not of actually doing it, but of feeling that way, of thinking about it. Now I get it. I understand why that was developed over time in me. And there are things about it that I really appreciate. More than anything, I've learned how to not act on it, to get to the root of why I'm feeling so distressful that I'm thinking about suicide. So I've reframed my own worldview. The next couple of slides are just examples for you to think about in your work. And how do we start reframing this? So I gave you a couple of non-recovery examples, things that are probably very common to you. You're working with a person, you meet with colleagues, they tell you that that person is working the system to get more food stamps. They tell you that she is a quote unquote borderline and is very manipulative. Thumbs up, shake your head, or put yes in the chat if you have ever heard that about somebody you're working with, or maybe even about yourself. Yes, I'm seeing a lot of head shakes. We do this to people all the time. Those labels, manipulative, borderline, and saying that she's gaming the system, tells me absolutely nothing about Jennifer. I want to understand her worldview, and where that is coming from without labeling it. What I realize is that Jennifer is a survivor. She is resilient. That is how she's gotten by. That is how she's been taught. That is how she has been shaped. And that is how she's been surviving. And that maybe she actually has a gift and a skill that she could use with others to teach them how to navigate food stamps, because that system is a mess. It's not an easy thing to navigate. That's how we start to reshape as a peer support specialist, to be change agents and to be in the system, but not of it. This next one, before meeting somebody new, Jack, his therapist tells you that Jack is a paranoid schizophrenic with blah and blah symptoms, auditory hallucinations. That tells me nothing about Jack. If anything, it might freak me out. So Jack has a label of paranoid schizophrenia. He hears voices. He thinks other people don't hear him. As a peer support specialist, I want to learn as much as I can about hearing voices and voice hearing if I'm not a voice hearer. There's a whole international society called Hearing Voices. I want to support Jack if he's interested in connecting with other voice hearers, to learn what it represents to him, what it means in his life, what has been helpful, what is not helpful. We have some people on the call today that I know personally that are voice hearers, that share their experience and support other people that are hearing voices, or have other types of what would be called extreme experiences to work through them and to continue to live their life. It's not about taking the meds, it's about living your life. And so again, this is an activity that you'll do on your own. I gave you a bunch of examples for you to then help to reframe in your work when you see these happening. Joan is unmotivated to do anything about her situation. We've made a referral to day treatment program. She keeps missing the appointments. How, as a peer support specialist, would you reframe that through understanding the unmet need, behavior as a communication, experience of trauma? You could start by using that grid that I gave you. What is the behavior? What are the functions of the behavior? How do we understand it? And then how do we support Joan? Jessica is back in the hospital again. Nothing really works with her. She's just an attention seeker. I know nobody's ever heard that one before. Lucy is a classic cutter. Every time she's depressed, she gets out a razor and she cuts her arm. How do we reframe and understand the person's experience? Communicate that with our colleagues to reframe through a recovery lens, and then support that person to understand the behavior themselves, not through the lens of their diagnosis, but through the lens of healing. And Jason is being non-compliant with the rules of the house. If he doesn't start to follow the rules, he will be kicked out. This is where Sharon comes in. Sharon is manipulative, Sharon is angry, Sharon is non-compliant, Sharon is service resistant. Let's kick her out. No. First of all, non-compliance does not exist in a peer community. We don't even use those terms to describe people. It says nothing about them. It says everything about the system and our lack of connection with that person. How do we start to understand Jason, get to know him, create a safe environment? What do the rules mean? What needs are he getting met? Is it power and control? Is it to be heard? Is it to be seen? And then how do we support him to get that power and control back? And it may have nothing to do with the treatment program. He might find it in other ways. And so then I've given you a few other ones. So let's end with this. I want to end with a person fell in a hole. This is a classic peer support specialist vignette. And I'll tell you the point of it at the end in relation to what we're talking about. A person with emotional distress fell into a hole and couldn't get out. A businessman went by. The person in the hole cried out for help. The businessman threw him some money and told him, get yourself a ladder. But the person could not find a ladder in this hole that he was in. A doctor walked by and the person said, help, I can't get out. The doctor gave him drugs and said, take this. It will relieve the pain. The person in the hole said thanks, but when the pills ran out, he was still stuck down there, all alone. A renowned psychiatrist rode by and heard the person's cries for help. He stooped and said, how did you get there? Were you born there? Were you put there by your parents? Tell me about yourself. It will alleviate your sense of loneliness. So the person talked with the psychiatrist for 15 billable units, and then the psychiatrist had to leave. A little Medicaid humor. But he said he'd be back the next week, and the person thanked him, but he was still in this hole. A priest came by. Again, the person in the hole cried out for help. The priest gave him a Bible and said, let's pray together. He got down on his knees and he prayed, and then he left. The person was very, very grateful. He read the Bible, but he was still stuck in that hole. A peer support specialist happened to be passing by. The person cried out, hey, you, help me, I'm stuck in this hole. Right away, the peer mentor jumped in the hole with him. The person in the hole said, what the blank are you doing? Now we're both stuck here. But the peer support specialist says, no, I've been here before, and I know how to get out. That is a classic peer support analysis of what our role is. It doesn't mean that the priest and the psychiatrist and the businessman and all of those other people were not helpful in different ways. It just means that when we are stuck in a dark place, we need somebody to get down there with us, not blame us for being in the hole, not say, well, it's your fault you're in that dark place. We're not concerned about the hole. We are concerned with supporting a person to find daylight and get the hell out of there. All right, everybody, with love and solidarity, it is 1:29. Shireen ended 1 minute early for the first time in her life. You are welcome. I'm going to stay on. If anybody wants to chat, you have parting comments, you want to unmute yourself and talk a little bit through this, I will stay on for a little while. You're welcome to leave if you need to do that as well. Here's how to get a hold of me, but I will stay on. Abby says, thank you for a great webinar. Martha said, this truth is so real and raw, it speaks to me deeply to the point of tears. I'm not typically emotional, especially about a webinar, a lunch and learn, but receiving this is incredibly helpful information, feels really good. So grateful. Martha, I hope someday we can do this in person, because if you think it's powerful like this, you should see it in a group of people. It is unbelievable. Honestly, it can be very life-changing once you understand this stuff. Okay, does anybody want to unmute yourself and say anything or have parting words in the chat?
Hey, Shireen, this is Tabitha.
Yeah, hey Tabitha.
Hey, in the examples, you talked about Lucy and the razors, the cutting behavior.
Yep.
Is it possible that you could just walk through Lucy with us for a minute?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Anybody that wants to walk through with Lucy on this, let's do it. So Lucy, so here's the label. This is what is being said in treatment providers. Lucy is a classic cutter. Every time she gets depressed, she takes out a razor and cuts her arm. So I want to know from experts on the experience, experts by experience on the phone or in the chat, if you have ever engaged in self-harm, please, and you're willing to be courageous and vulnerable, can you please explain to us why? What is the function of self-harm, cutting, burning, that type of thing? What was it about to you? What purpose did it serve for you? So let's start there, and I don't want to impose my experience quite yet. Share with me, if you will, what is your experience of it, either in chat or unmute? So let's start there. What is self-harm actually about?
It's about harming yourself. It's about having a need met that's not unmet. And mine was to commit suicide and to lay down my life, because I felt that my parents was divorced and I just didn't want to live anymore. So I drank all this alcohol and I laid down. I just wanted to get a need met that was not met.
So there are a couple things I'm hearing you say. Tell me, David, if I'm wrong or if I'm right. I hear hopelessness in this. Lay down my life because it just doesn't matter anymore. Drink myself to death because there is no point. There is no future. My parents are doing everything that they have done. I felt harmed. I felt traumatized. So what is the point anymore? Am I hearing that correctly? Okay, so I'm seeing you shake head. Okay, so one function for you could have been hopelessness. If the function is hopelessness, I feel hopeless. What are ways that we can support somebody through hopelessness?
You can relate. I can relate to somebody who's going through that because I've been there. So you come along beside that person and say, okay, I've done that too. You begin to share about your experience, and that you'll be surprised and amazed how the other person will begin to open up, and you'll be able to form a relationship with that person.
Okay, so one way to do it is if you have that shared experience to say, gosh, I don't know your experience and I can't even begin to understand the pain that you're in. I do know what it's like though to do X, Y, and Z. And for me, it felt like this. What does it feel like to you? So that's one approach. What if you don't have that shared lived experience to draw off of? You've never engaged in self-harm. You've never experienced suicidal thoughts. And you know the function is hopelessness, that the person is communicating, I feel hopeless. How can we support people to find hope?
I think we can, number one, helping them to be grounded because they're feeling a pain, sensing into that pain and trying to find a new way for them to work towards something that gives them hope.
Absolutely. So there's
Go ahead.
in there. One is you're numbing out, right? So I'm like out of here. So becoming grounded helps people to get connected with their body, live in it, and figure out, support people to work through the trauma and the pain. Because self-harm, if the function is suicide, it's the ultimate escape. It's the ultimate avoidance. There is something about being in my skin that feels too emotionally disruptive to me. So we want to support people to work through really intense emotions, be inside their body in a safe way. That was absolutely the case for me. The second part of that, Tabitha, you said, is to find hope. If you're experiencing hopelessness, the antidote for hopelessness is not a medication. It's not to remove all of the scissors and ways for Lucy to cut. It's to help her find hope. Hopelessness is usually a lack of meaning and a lack of purpose in my life. Right. And I want you to think about this from somebody who's been systematized. If today looks like yesterday and tomorrow looks like today, why wouldn't I take a razor? What is the point of continuing to do the same thing every single day? Feel like shit, be called non-compliant, and show up to this every single day. Well, how do we help people out of it? We disconnect the cycle of hopelessness. I'm sorry, yes, somebody else was talking.
Sorry, I'm Julie, I'm jumping in.
No, go ahead, Julie.
Hi. My experience was was being really depressed and lonely, and I found an activity where I thought I would find friends and a purpose, which was my being an activist and getting out there. And one time I was working in a clubhouse with people with paranoid schizophrenia, and I just said, let's go to Raleigh and join this demonstration against cutting Medicaid. And there was a certain level of understanding and not, but we just went there and we walked in a circle and people loved us. Also, I mean, you're not going to jump from suicidal depression into, a demonstration, but my other ideas are like finding, this is totally opposite direction, but finding a hobby, finding something you like to do, maybe volunteer work, maybe, and baby steps. But I think what's really important was, do you like to draw? Do you like to have coloring books? Do you like to talk? Do you like to, because I'm really, I can be focused on the function, the function of activity.
Yeah. So Julie, can I step in with 2 observations around this?
Yes.
So you've just added 2 more functions. One function is despair. I feel despair, which is another way of saying hopelessness. I need purpose and meaning in my life. I feel despair, right? And when you're getting into activities and hobbies and things like that, you're talking about the antidote to despair or hopelessness, which is having something that feels good to me to do that is not just about everything I've ever been through or ever done in my life based on my diagnosis. The second layer that you've added is another function. You're talking about the function of loneliness. And when you bring back loneliness, what the need is connection, right? From that list. When you felt connected to a purpose, a voice, making sure that whatever you have been through doesn't go for nothing, getting involved in social justice, you have just found for yourself an antidote to connect with people, to not be lonely anymore, but also to connect to a purpose that is greater than what's happening inside your mind at any given time.
Right.
That's a whole nother function. And those are a whole nother way to support somebody through that function. Let me ask you another one. What if the function is to do the opposite? So Tabitha, we talked about numbing out. It's like the ultimate out of life. What if the function of self-harm is the opposite, which is to feel something? What is that function? When the person is harming themselves, what are they really communicating if it's to feel something?
Shireen, for me, it was to feel something different than the intensity of despair and hopelessness and all of that. I wanted to, it was like I was full, and if I didn't self-harm, I would explode.
Yes, okay, so beautiful example. So Tabitha, when we talk about emotional distress and you talk about grounding, self-harm is one of the survivor techniques to ground.
Okay.
It sounds so weird and contraindicated, right?
Yes.
What self-harm does is it puts me back into my physical body so that I don't have to live in the emotional pain anymore. And it brings me back to something that is very concrete, that I can see, I can feel, and I can do something with, as opposed to the emotional distress. So one of the functions for somebody could be to feel something that I actually can put my hands around that doesn't feel emotionally so overwhelming. So if the function is to feel something different, like Sharon said, what are ways we can support that person to get the need met, to be grounded, or to feel something different that also serves the purpose of healing through emotional pain? Because that's the other part. It's not just about grounding for grounding's sake. It's about getting the same relief from whatever I'm doing that I got from cutting. What are some ways that we can support people to get that type of groundedness? Yeah, David.
My support would be to help the person to understand it's okay to feel the real feelings, because a lot of times I wanted to drink or drug or self-medicate or do anything to escape the reality of the feeling. I didn't want to feel the real feelings. So I would substitute that with doing things out of the norm or out of the ordinary. And the way I would help a person is to show them that it's okay to feel angry. It's okay to feel fear. It's okay to feel not accepted, because we all have had a shared experience. That's the way I would.
So there's two parts to what you're saying. One is supporting a person to feel things and realize that the feeling itself is not going to kill you. Like what the body feels like is, if I feel something strong, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, right? That's what happens to our nervous system. What you're saying is to reinforce and validate the person's feelings, not numb it away, not excuse it, not label it, not say don't feel that way, not say, okay, it's okay to feel that way, but you need to pull yourself up and move on. No. But in order to do that, so that's one piece of it. In order to do that, we have to create safety, and we also have to create an outlet. If we take away the way the person has been surviving, in this case through cutting, if we just take away their access to sharp things and say, we need to sit through discomforts, we are increasing their risk of suicide. So let me say that again. If we are giving the person the message that it's okay to feel things and we're just going to sit through it, but we take away the only way that they have been coping and surviving by removing cutting from their abilities, we've given them absolutely no outlet, and they are then trapped inside this body that they have learned how to avoid for years and years and years. So if we're going to support them to sit in their skin and their feelings, we simultaneously have to support them to explore other ways to get that need met. If it's for the purpose of grounding, that means very tangible and concrete things to try, to see what you can try to get the same relief that cutting has been giving you. Does that make sense? So I want to make sure that we are not leaving somebody in a discomfort in their own body without exploring with them other ways to get it out of their body. Because if we just try to change the behavior, that is when we create dangerous situations. So I want to pause and say, does that make sense?
It makes sense to me. It does. Very helpful.
Okay. So, and we could go on and on, Tabitha, about the functions of self-harm. There are a lot of reasons why people self-harm. People have learned that self-harm will get me into a hospital. The question is, why is it that a person wants to be in the hospital? What is it about that that is meeting a need? Sometimes it's a need to be seen. Sometimes it's a need to be doted on or loved. We call it attention seeking. I hate it. Because as human beings, we are wired to need to be seen and to connect and to be loved. When somebody is harming themselves in order to be seen and to be loved and to connect, to get themselves in the hospital, what I recognize is they haven't developed or don't have another space in their life to get that connection met. And what they've learned over time is if I do this, then people will pay attention to me. If I don't support that person to get their connection need met in a different way, they will continue to engage in that behavior because it's working for them. Tabitha, did that help at all?
It did. Very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Does anybody else have something to add, something to question, or something to challenge me? You know, I'm always up for a challenge. Oh, Martha said, change the language from attention seeking to connection seeking. Martha, you need to copyright that. It changes, you are absolutely right, that changes the perspective completely. Takes away that, that dismissal, that judgment, that blaming, shaming, criticizing, and accusing, that label, and brings it to something we all can relate to. We are all connection seeking. That's how we are wired. This is why COVID is so hard for so many people. We are wired to seek connection. Okay, anybody else? I don't want to cut you off too soon. It's 1:46. Does anybody else have something brilliant to add?
Well, Shireen, I have some kind of administrative-y stuff if you want to stay on with me, or if you want to go. It'd just be easier than messaging.
Yeah, we can do that.
Can
Okay,
our email address to get the PowerPoint?
Yep, so I can send you the PowerPoint individually. We're trying to figure out how to post them on Facebook. It's not the easiest place to post, but this is our 12th Lunch and Learn, Tabitha. And I can even send you a link to the Dropbox that has all of the previous PowerPoints if you want it, or if you just want
I want it. I want it.
Okay, I will send you the link to the Dropbox for all of them.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much, Shireen.
You're so welcome. Everybody, please be well, be safe. I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I love you, and I hope you have a beautiful weekend. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Shireen.
Thank you.
You're welcome.